my not turned on. Just kind of reach up there and, well, you didn't really have to get up, but okay, it's going to take a minute and the other ones are going to turn off. It's fine. It's going to shut my other ones off for a moment, but they'll come back on. Boink, boinky, boink. Hey, dog.
Where is it?
Come on, bud.
Okay, you're on.
Is it time to record?
Yep.
All right, howdy, y'all. Getting off the little rocky start here. Computer is not cooperating. Come on, there you go. All right, so this week we begin with Vayikra, chapter 7, verse 6. And I just somehow got a sticker in my foot. It came out of nowhere. Also known as Leviticus chapter 7, verse 6. The very literal English would say, all males will eat with the Kohanim. They will eat it with in the holy place. That which they eat is holy holies. All right, so you know that's probably an idiom, I hope, an idiom that we've already had. Wait a minute. No, that's a translation from last week. We're starting with 7:7. That's right. So the literal translation, that was not a literal translation, was it? That was a regular translation. So anyway, the literal translation of 7:7 is as sin, as guilt, Torah 1 to them, the priest, that he cover in it, to he will be. All right, sounds weird, but it'll be cool. Kahatat sin, or like, Like, like sin. It is as sin, which is also like saying it is like sin, or according to sin. But it's a word at this point because they've added that cough to the front of it. That's the k sound, the ka, chatat, which chatat's your word. But they've added the ka sound to it, so that makes it like or as, and it'll make more sense as we go on. Sin is so simple. It is so simple, but it is so lost upon the children of Yisrael, of the modern world, and certainly on the Christians. Because, oh my goodness, I'm reading, or just finished reading, a book by a young Jewish guy from Israel, and he's talking about sin as if the Christians have the corner on that market. And it's like, oh my goodness. Drinking wine or alcohol of any kind is not a sin. Drinking to excess is not necessarily a sin, because you can get, you can drink a little too much and get a little tipsy, or drink a little too much and get a lot tipsy, and that doesn't make it a sin. When it becomes a sin is when that becomes your lifestyle, when that becomes more important than your relationships and your work environment, and more important than whether or not you should get behind the wheel of a car. Now that becomes a sin. But the drinking itself is not a sin. How do I know that? Well, there's a verse that I keep telling. I'm just going to say it and say it and say it until I'm off, not saying anything anymore, if you know what I'm saying. But there's a verse that I think that every Jew and every Christian needs to memorize. And in Testament, yes, it is. And before the Jews jump off the ship and run out the door screaming, listen to me, you need to learn this. This is something that will work out real well for you. Same thing for the Christians. But it comes from 1 John chapter 3, verse 4. You just leave out the 2. 1, no 2, then 3, then 4. Verse 4, chapter 3, verse 4. Everyone who commits sin is also in rebellion of the Torah, because sin is Torah rebellion. Wow. So when a Christian comes up and starts trying to explain what sin is and is not to a Jew, all a Jew has to do is say this one verse from the Christian Bible, right? Everyone who commits sin is also in rebellion of the Torah, because sin is Torah rebellion. So what does that mean to the Jewish world? Then, well, I mean, sure, we can run off a Christian with that one. Well, here's what it means to both worlds. And if the Torah says that something is a sin, it's a sin. Plain and simple. It's not a sin for one person and not a sin for another. It's not a sin. It is for one person and then not a sin for another. That sounds strange to me for some reason, but that is a correct statement. It is not good for one and bad for the other. It is the same for everyone. If it does not say it's a sin, it is not a sin. It makes no difference how offended you are or how disgusted you are by something that somebody else is saying or doing. If the Torah does not call it a sin, it is not now, nor has it ever been, or will it ever be a sin, because sin is Torah rebellion. So if the Torah says that you must wear a fringe and you say, I'm a Christian, I don't need to wear a fringe because I live by grace and not the law, you live in sin. And you know what else the New Testament says? It says, for we know that God does not listen to or does not hear sinners. For we know that God does not hear sinners. So if you're being told to do something by the Torah and you're not doing it, you are a sinner, and according to the New Testament, God doesn't hear you. You could pray until the cows come home, and God's never going to hear you. Why? Because you're a sinner, and your book says that God does not hear sinners. Oh, well, that's not my interpretation. Well, good luck with that, because in the end, it doesn't matter if you're Christian or Jew or whatever else you are. If you're standing before God, the only thing that's going to matter is his interpretation of it, not yours. He's not going to care what you thought it should mean. He's only going to care what he thought it should mean. So I would be a little hesitant to run around saying that's not what it means to me, if you know what I'm saying. So if it tells you not to do something and you do it, that is to you sin. If it tells you to do something and you don't, that is sin. And that is the sum total of what sin is and what sin is not. There's nothing else to it. Next word is ka'asham. Or what? Oh, she's telling me to look over here. Hey, y'all. Oop, I should use this hand. Hey, y'all. Anyway, we have the same thing. We have that ka sound, that cough that's been added to the front. So that's as or like. And now this is asham. This is the word for guilt. Something has happened that you have acquired guilt for yourself. For instance, you were told to wear a fringe. You do not wear a fringe. There is guilt on your shoulders. There is guilt in your life, right? So this is guilt. This is blame. You've done something that causes blame, because you're at fault here. And that's what we're talking about, guilt. You're at fault. You've done or not done something that has caused you to be at fault. And then it says Torah. I wonder what that has to do with anything. I'm just saying. Torah is not the Hebrew word for law, by the way. It is the word law is the word that Torah is translated into in English Bibles. Very, very wrong. Torah is the instruction. The mitzvot are the law. So, for instance, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, right? The Decalogue, the 10. Those are categories. of law. Categories, because it doesn't say commandments. That's a terrible translation. It says words. They are called the 10 words. Well, what would be the modern translation of that? Well, it would be categories. There are 10 categories of sin. Because you can kill somebody and not commit murder. Think about it. You're driving along and some drunk steps out in front of your car. That happened to me once when I was very young. I was 16 years old when that happened. I didn't kill him, but he did fly up in the air and my windshield. Blood went all the way across a windshield. Then he did a flip off the top of my car and landed in the middle of the highway. And I could see a car coming the other way at a very high rate of speed. So I backed my car across the highway. He went off into the ditch. He was a big biker-looking guy and jumps out, I want to kill you. What do you think you're doing? I just yelled at him, there's a dead man in the road. Because I thought the guy was dead. Because at that point, he wasn't moving. He's like, what? So we went over there, and about that time, the guy starts moving around. And anyway, the long story, very weird story. It gets very weird after that. But anyway, why was I telling you all that?
You could kill somebody without committing murder.
Right. So if I killed him, would that have been murder? No. I may or may not have been charged with something, but I could have been, if he'd have died, I could have been charged with involuntary manslaughter, right? So you can kill somebody without dying. So the thou shalt not kill, if you will, that's God never said thou shalt not. That's garbage from the dark ages. But because God did not talk that way. He didn't. So quit doing your thus saith the Lord, because God don't talk that way. Anyway, and by the way, if you're talking for God and he's not really telling you stuff, woo, are you in some bad way with God? So it's a category. And then within that category, it breaks down. Well, here's what manslaughter is. Here's what involuntary manslaughter is. And here's the instruction on premeditated murder. And here's the instruction on murder because of, that in temporary insanity, and then murder because of that passion. You catch your wife with somebody and your best friend and you kill your wife. Well, after all, he was your best friend. All right. Anyway, I'm just saying, he is your best friend. Those are all of the breakdowns. So you start off with the category, and then you get into the instruction on those. So to say that you don't live by the Torah, you live by grace, is asinine. It is so dumb that we can't even come up with a word for it. And by the way, that is not a cuss word and is not a derivative of a cuss word. I've been asked that many times. No, it's a big word with more than one syllable. Is that okay? It's a $10 word. It just means it's so far that you shouldn't even have to explain yourself on this one. But that's for another day. If you want to know about it, give me an email. I don't do much on the telephone. It doesn't work most of the time. So sending me a text doesn't seem to be. Anyway, so we know what the Torah is. We know that it is the instruction on the law itself. This is achat. That's the word for one. As in the number one, the first thing. Achat is used for the first thing more commonly, since it's got the feminine plural ending on it. Because achat is your actual word. So now that this has a feminine plural ending on it, you know that it's going to be a little different, right? So it's usually for the word first, not so much for the number one. Ham, not lahem, without the sorry about that, lahem. That's to them. Then it's ha Cohen. It's not in plural. I thought this was in plural. It's not in plural. That's priest in singular. Asher yechaper. The priest that is the covering for him. To cover over, whence the one who's covering over. This is the one who is the mediator for this sin offering, this sin sacrifice. And it says bow, which is sounded like, bow sounds like come here, but it's actually to him or to it. It could be either one. It just depends on the context. We'll know real quick what it is. This is yiyeh, which is literally he will be. Or you could just say will be. It doesn't have to, you don't have to put that masculine beginning in there. I always do because it helps people understand who are learning Hebrew. It helps them to understand how to form their sentences better, which is why I do it. Okay, so the translation is this. One thing I left out, and I've said it, the word for sin here is we have to add the word offering for the reader to truly understand what's going on. In Hebrew, because the word is the word for a sin offering, we would not normally do that. Well, actually, would never do that. But in English, the translation has to. So I've added the word offering where you see sin and guilt, so that the sentence makes the kind of sense that it needs to make. All right, so the translation. The sin offering will be done in the same way as the guilt offering. Remember the k sound, the ka that was added to the as and like? You don't say it twice. You just say it once. Do you guys remember Kasuto teaching us that way back in the beginning of somewhere like Exodus 12? So the sin offering, it's not going to be the sin offering as will be done in the same way as because that would never make any sense for one thing. You don't do that when you're translating Hebrew. So what you say is the sin offering will be done in the same way as the guilt offering. One instruction, not one law, but one instruction for both of them. So you use this instruction that you're using for the sin offering is the same instruction that you use for the guilt offering, meaning they will be done exactly the same way. So you have one for both of them, and it goes on. The Cohen, the priest, how many people do you know with the last name of Cohen? That's the Hebrew word for priest, right? We have an attorney general whose last name is Bar. That's a Hebrew word. Well, it's actually the Chaldee word, but it's used by the Jews for the word son. Ben Affleck or Ben Shapiro, maybe I should say, because I don't like Affleck, his liberal loudmouth ways. Let's use Ben Shapiro. I like him. Anyway, son, right? That's the Hebrew word for son, but bar being the right. So you'd be surprised how much Hebrew you already speak. So anyway, this is Cohen. This is a priest, and it's a very common last name in America, right? So the Cohen, who is the covering in it, in what? The sacrifice. The Cohen who is the covenant, who is the covering in the sacrifice. The sacrifice, it says it, but what is the it? The it is the sacrifice in this sentence. The sacrifice, and it says, to he will be. Do you guys remember this? This is a Hebrew idiom, a very common one. So what does it mean? Belongs to the Cohen, because the Cohen being the subject here. So what it says then, the Cohen who is the covering in the sacrifice belongs to him being the Cohen. You got it? Of the word Cohen, who is the covering, Rashi and Sifra wrote that only an eligible priest could eat of the offering as long as he was not unclean in some way. Must have been a slow day and they had nothing substantial to give, but it is right. I mean, if a priest gets up and he goes to work and gets there and realizes he has this oozing sore coming out of the middle, got a third eye up here and it's oozing, well, he's not going to be allowed to do the offering, let alone eat of the offering, because the only one that gets to eat of it is the one who does it. So if he's disqualified because of something like that, or he's cut himself and he's anemic and he can't stop the bleeding, that's going to happen, right? I had that problem when I was younger in life. I would just get up and all of a sudden my nose would be bleeding because I was anemic. Well, if people like that, when they cut themselves, they'll just bleed, bleed, bleed. That happens to diabetics as well. So you can understand how things like this would happen, and that priest would not be clean, pure enough, if you will, to be able to do the duty, because that was one of the laws. You can't do that if you have an oozing sore of any kind. So they're right, but it just seems ridiculous to add that. But so moving on to the next verse, I'm going to read you a little something that Kyle and Deluche said. They said, in the case of the burnt offering, the skin of the animal was to fall to the lot of the officiating priest, vis-a-vis, they really like to say that, as payment for his services. That's a little out there, but you could look at it that way if you want to. They go on, ha Cohen is construed absolutely as for the priest who offereth the skin of the burnt offering which he offereth shall belong to the priest for to him. I'm doing air quote. You can't. No, wrong hand. Here we go. Anyway, this was probably the case also with the trespass offering and sin offering of the laity, whereas the skin of the peace offerings belong to the owner of the animal. They're saying, see the Mishnah in Sabach 12:3. All right. I'm not really sure you can follow what they said. That nonsense talking like King James. This is the 1800s. Why are they still talking like King James? Down. Down. In the case of the burnt offering, the skin of the animal was to fall to the lot of the priest. All they're saying is on certain offerings, the hide of the animal, I don't know why they use the word skin. That seems very weird. But the hide of the animal would go to the priest, and on other offerings, the hide went to the person who brought the animal. So, okay, that sounds like a good thing to tell you. All right, so in verse 8, we're still in chapter 7, the very, very literal translation says, and the Cohen that made come, so we would say bring, the Cohen that we would say, burnt offering, man hide the burnt offering that came near the Cohen, to he will be. So there's your idiom again. So it belonged to the Cohen. So we start off with the and the Cohen. That's just and the priest. Ha mak riv, that okay, so he's saying the Cohen who brings this thing near, the Cohen who's going to officiate. So they're using the word makriv, which is it's written in such a way as it makes it a commandment. It's this guy who makes that animal. I guess commandment's the wrong word, very wrong word. Okay, so since we're talking about an animal, so there's a Cohen, he's going to take the leash, he's going to lead that animal to this place, or maybe he's going to pick it up because it's a little lamb, at a year old, how big could it be, right? I don't know, I guess it could be pretty big, about the size of my dog. I hope it don't weigh as much, though. Whoo! So anyway, maybe he picks it up. But anyway, the lamb is not just going to walk itself over there and lay itself down ready for the thing. So it's saying that the one who brings it, the one who brought it, Olat, the one who brings it as the burnt offering, Ish, now we have the word for man, and then it says or, which is a sound like word because or is the word for light. But in this case, because of the way it's spelled, it's hide. It's the hide of this animal. Ha'olah, the hide of the burnt offering. Asher hikriv, that was brought. So the man brought the animal to the place, and then the priest takes the animal and takes it the rest of the way through. So you're seeing there's two steps. The man brings this animal to the place of sacrifice, and then the priest takes over from that point and makes it a sacrifice, right? That should be relatively clear by the way this verse is written. To the Cohen, this is lo, another sound-alike word. In this case, it's to him or to it. In this case, it'd be to him. They brought it to the Cohen, right? This is ye yeah, or so it's to the Cohen, ye yeah, he will be. There's your idiom. So our translation is pretty straightforward. And the Cohen who brings the burnt offering for a man, it's really more about the one that the man brought, but this is okay. The hide of the burnt offering that was offered belongs to the Cohen, and which is why Kyle and Deluge brought this up. They want to point this out and make sure that you understand it's not always to the Cohen. Sometimes it belongs to the person, but in this case, because it's a burnt offering, it belongs to the Cohen. And this is pretty pricey stuff here. This is you can make a Torah scroll out of this thing. You can make a family lineage thing out of this thing, or you can sell it to somebody who wants to make a Torah scroll. This has got some real value. What did we pay for ours? We've got one of these. We paid $150, and that else was wanting for those. So we felt very blessed. If you want to see what these hides look like, we have one in our living room. It's draped over our little footstool thing. All right, so anyway, of the words burnt offering, Nachmanides pointed out that the priest kept the skin of the sacrifice unless it was the shelamim, since the person who brings the shelamim keeps the skin. So what Nachmanides is saying is it always belongs to the Kohanim except the shelamim sacrifices. Do you hear shalom in that? Maybe you do, maybe you don't, but that's the peace offering. All right, then Rashi wrote that any priest could take the skin, but even Ezra said, no, only mediating priest could take the skin as per the Hebrew text. I'll have to agree with even Ezra. It doesn't say in the text that anyone can say it. It makes it very clear that it is, in fact, the officiating priest, right? So Rashi's a little out there, except you really can't count him completely out in this one. I would like to because I don't like him. But, so you got to give the guy his due, right? Because if the officiating priest decides, hey, I've got 12 of these, I don't need another one. Hey, here, priest walking by, take that with you. He can do it. It's his. It's his prerogative to give it to anybody he wants to. But the man who brings that thing does not get to make that kind of a decision. It would have to be the officiating priest. So in the end, I'm going to go with Ibn Ezra because I just don't like Rashi. Anyway, of verses 9 and 10, the Kyle and Deluge says, they said, the following law is laid down with reference to the meat offering, that everything baked in the oven and everything prepared in a pot or pan was to belong to the priest, who burned the portion of it upon the altar, and that everything mixed with oil and everything dry was to belong, which would be the regular priest, i.e., they said to all the priests. Then they said to one as much as another, so that they were all to receive an equal share. What the heck they're basing that on, I don't know, but they decided that this was politically correct socialist organization. Anyway, then they go on. The reason for this distinction is not very clear, that all the meat offerings described in chapter 2 should fall to the sons of Aharon, which are the priests, of course, with the exception of that portion which was burned upon the altar as an azkara, followed from the fact that they were most holy. I didn't point that out in that verse, did I? It said holy holies, but that was just a way of saying most holy. So when you see most holy in your translations, it usually in the Hebrew says holy holies, right? I just now realized I didn't say that earlier. And anyway, they go on. As the meat offerings, which consisted of pastry and were offered in the form of prepared food, according to verse 9, are the same as those described in chapter 2, verses 4 through 8. It is evident that by those mentioned in verse 10 are to understand the kinds described in chapter 2, verses 1 through 3 and 14 through 16. And by the dry, primarily the I can't be sure about this Hebrew. The spelling is incorrect. Something consisted of dried grains, the oil to be added to chapter 2, which now they've given me the word natan, which means gift, though not poured on it, as in the case of the offering. Well, I've messed it up. The spelling is so bad I don't know what it says, and that's my fault. I typed it. Probably also that the sin offering and jealousy offerings. Okay, then it says, the reason, therefore, why those which consisted of cake and pastry fell to the lot of the officiating priest, and those which consisted of flour mixed with oil, of dry corn, or of simple flour, were divided among the priests, with an S on the end, was probably simply this, that the former were for the most part offered only, and then merely in small quantities, whereas the latter were the ordinary forms in which the meat offerings, well, it did say meat offerings, didn't it, were presented, and amounted to more than the officiating priest could possibly consume or dispose of by themselves. Well, this is all conjecture. They're trying to understand why some of this stuff went to one person and why some of it went to others. And their conclusion is, well, the stuff that went to the single guy was always a small amount, and the stuff that went to many people was a large amount. So they're probably right. I'm not saying that it's wrong, but I am saying it's still just conjecture. These guys are just throwing it out there and hoping it sticks, because sometimes the Bible simply doesn't tell us everything, and that's okay. I know that when I was younger, I had a problem with, if you can't tell me why I'm supposed to not eat pork, then phooey on you, I'm going to eat pork, right? Well, I never really felt that way about pork, but it bothers me that I'm using a bad example. What's a good example? If you can't tell me why I should stay in a pup tent for 7 days for a whole week every year, then I'm not going to do it, because that kind of is how I felt about that. Because I kind of like the tradition of you eat a meal in this silly little box you make in your backyard one time a week, or maybe at dinner time during the week, so long as it's not raining, of course. I like that better. It was more convenient, I suppose. But once you grow out of all that childishness, you finally realize, you know what? If God didn't tell us, I'm okay with that. And sometimes I think that's what we just need to do, is grow up and say, you know what? If God didn't tell us, that's fine. That's just fine. We probably didn't need to know it anyway. All right. Got to look at my time here real quick. So verse 9. This is all offering that you shall bake oven, and all made in frying pan, and upon griddle, the Cohen that make come, or the Cohen that bring her to he shall be. So instead of it being in masculine this time, it's in the feminine, but it's still the same thing. It doesn't matter. All right. And I guess I should say something about some Hebrew grammar here. There's no such thing as a noun in Hebrew. There's a verb in Hebrew. There's no such thing as a comma, a period, an exclamation point. There is no such thing as English grammar in Hebrew, period, end of story. So when we start trying to understand Hebrew in English, what do? We try to make it make sense via our rules. Well, our rules don't work because those things don't exist in that language. So you get a noun, something we would call a noun, and suddenly it's a verb. And then you're reading things like it's a noun of action. What do you mean a noun of action? There's no such thing in English, right? You're going to have all kinds of issues with that. The reason why they put things in future tense and past tense have nothing to do with what we think of as future and past tense, because for us, the future is what's ahead of us. The present is where we are right this moment, and it's very fleeting, right? Because everything I said a while ago is now in the past. Because everything, like my parents were born before me, they're in the past. So that's not how it works in Hebrew. In Hebrew, everyone that's gone before you is ahead of you, not behind you. Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, right? Basically the founders of this religion, the fathers, the very first fathers of this religion, if you will, they're ahead of us. They're where we're going. We are at the back of the line. And that's the way we're reading the Bible. It makes no sense the other way around. There is future tense is something, we think of as in the past. They're talking about something that is ahead of us, which means it can be in the past and it can be in the future. Because in the future, we're going to wind up where they are. But we think of them as behind us, yet they're ahead of us. So trying to put our rules in here doesn't make any sense. We can't make it make sense. And the reasoning for gender, for the masculine and the feminine, is not the same thing as Spanish. It doesn't mean the same thing. The gender is not the same thing in Hebrew. Nothing about Hebrew is like English or Spanish or any other Latin-based language. So we've got to get past that and not worry about, well, here it says her and there it said him. So there's this deep 300-page dissertation that needs to be written about it. Yeah. Anyway, our next word, I haven't even started, have I? The whole and all mincha. Mincha, all the offering. It's a gift, it's tribute, it's what we're talking about. You bring in the offering to this place and you're going to make this offering. Asher te'afeh. So all of the offerings that you're going to bake. What do you bake? You bake bread, right? Because it's in an oven. And yes, they did have something that we would think of as an oven. It was an enclosed way of cooking things, so it was an oven. And they are talking about baking in that way. So everything that is te'afeh, everything that you bake ba tanur, in an oven. They say here that as to the ovens of the Orientals, and yes, Jews are Oriental. Where is the Orient? That's the English word that means what? East. So the Orient is in the East. Where do we hear everybody say when they talk about what's going on in Israel? What do they call it? The Middle East. It is smack dab in the middle of. So yes, we are Oriental. All right, but he says, as to the ovens of the Orientals, which have often the form of a great pot. So what do we think of immediately? The cauldron? Is that what the word is? We think of the cauldron and the witches with their little pointer hats. No. No, that is not right. Yes, they had those, but they also had the ovens that were normally in the ground, and more like a pizza oven. Think of it that way, because that's what is being spoken of here. Then it says the whole and all na'asa, everything that is made, everything that is created, put together, by the work of a man will, if you will, bamar keshet, in a frying pan. And yes, they had frying pans. I doubt they look quite like ours, but this is probably your word for cauldron here. Is you'd be able to fry in there. Doesn't just because you have a cauldron that say it's 3 feet deep does not mean you have to put 3 feet worth of water in it to cook something, right? You can cook something right on the bottom of it. I'm not sure you'd want to do it that way. So cauldron may not be the right word, but it's more along those lines because it has a wall that comes up. This is ve'al, and upon mahovat. That's a griddle, and that literally they just had just a flat plate that was over your fire, and they called that a griddle. And so it wouldn't be like a square flat plate with a handle on it like what we have today. It would have been more like if you go to a rest cooking on that flat stove thingy, they call that a griddle because that's what that is, a flat plate over the fire. So it makes that a griddle. All right, where are we? Oh, so we got the griddle. So all of those things that are they're either cooked in an oven, or they're cooked in a pan, or they're cooked on a griddle, right? All of those things, la Cohen, it says, to the Cohen, hamak riv, to the Cohen who brings it. They are, I say two, but we can think of the word for, F-O-R, not the number 4, but the word for. They are for the Cohen who brings that offering, the one who brings it to fruition, the one that finishes the job, if you will. That stuff is for him. And this is Otah, which is the feminine of Et, which is a pointer. And we say her, which is because it's feminine. It really doesn't have a meaning. But we have to put something here, in other words, for this thing to work. So this is to her, it says lo, to he, rather, sorry, to he. Then it says tiye instead of ye. So now it's feminine. To he, she shall be. Right? So there's this mixing of the gender, if you will. Well, why did they mix the gender? Well, honestly, I don't know. It seems odd in this sentence, but it made sense to somebody at some point. I'm just saying, truthfully. Well, you'd have to make it feminine because it has they've added the tate, or can put the tate in there instead of the yod, so it is feminine. You can't. The type of offering was feminine. Why would you say that?
That's what I'm saying. Any offering, and it was always, the offering was the bake offering, the flour and all that. It was always feminine.
Well, it wouldn't be written in the feminine because it's a woman's work. That's the wrong way to look at feminine. But it's feminine because the things are certain things that are named are always named in the feminine. So if they are named in the feminine, let's go back and look if they were. I didn't even think to see griddle. Yeah, griddle is in the feminine. All of them end in a tate. They're all feminine. That's why this is in feminine. It has nothing to do with female. It's just that these things are named, and when they are named in the feminine. I'm trying to think of what else they do that with. I think they do that with names of towns. They're always in the feminine. And so the sentence is going to be written in the feminine, even though it has nothing to do with a female as opposed to a male. Are we okay? All right. Found a way to explain this that makes some sense. So there's a reason for it in Hebrew, but it has nothing to do with the male and the female gender. Okay. So our translation then, and every offering you shall bake in an oven, and everything made in a frying pan and on a griddle, that Cohen will bring, or that the Cohen brought, you can say it that way as well, belongs to the Cohen. To he she will be. It belongs to the Cohen. Okay. Oh no. My timer shut off.
15 minutes.
I mean, totally blank as it can be. Oh.
15 minutes.
Okay. You'll have to give me some kind of notice. All right. So in verse 10, and all offering with mingled with fat and dry to all children Aharon shall be man as brother his. Okay, so this is going to change up a little bit. V'chol and all mincha. So we're still on the offerings, right? And all the offerings, velula, that are mingled, that are poured. Probably we should have said poured over instead of mingled. But if you're pouring something on something, you're mingling it together. There is a mixing going on there, though it's not as good as stirring with a spoon, and that's not as good as stirring with what's that thing called? The little what?
Mixer.
Oh, I was thinking of the hand one. Whisk. And that's not as good as a mixer. Anyway, so that's velula. It's something that's poured over, and so then it's there's a melting, a mixing of the thing together. And then it says veshamen. Well, and fat. That's the fat that comes from your olive oil is fat. Your meat that you'll trim off, the fat you trim off your meat is fat. There's a lot of ways for fat to be a part of this. Then it says va ha reva, which is and dry. This is le chol b'nei, to all the children, Aharon. So all of this stuff that is mingled together, and then why would it go for something that is mixed together dry? Let me look at this a second. And all the offerings that are mingled with oil. That's what they're saying. And so all of these offerings that are mingled with oil and the dry, in other words, everything that's mingled with oil and everything that is not mingled with oil, trying to cover the whole spectrum here, goes to the children of Aharon. Those are the priests. Then it says Tiyeh, which is she shall be, Ish, a man, that's the word for man as opposed to a woman, Ke'achiv, which is like brother his. So she shall be man as brother his. You guys probably should have been able to catch what that means just by what I just said. And every gift which is mingled with fat or dry are for all the children of Aharon will be the same. Man as his brother, they will be the same. Everyone gets the same thing. It doesn't mean they all get the same amount. It means they get the same thing. I bet you this is where they were getting the idea of everybody got the same amount. Of the words mingled, onkelos by Drauzine and Wagner wrote, onkelos is, in my head I have an apostrophe that's not there. Onkelos fluctuates between 5 different substitutions for the Bible's harav, which is dry, and uses words that fit the context of the passage. He uses mixed, dry, drought, dry land, and waste. And these are different ways of using this same word, but here in this one place, dry is the only thing that you're going to find him using. Because this harav, you could say the aretz harav, the land is dry, and you could be talking about a drought, or you could be talking about the land has been laid waste. There's no inhabitants there, or it's been burn to the ground. This one word is used for all of these things, but in this case, we're talking about dry food, things that have not been. I'm looking for my timer and I don't have it. Okay, so we're moving on, and we're going to talk about, that was verse, 10? Yeah. So we're moving on to 11, and the Chaldalutes say that verses 11 through 36, the law of the peace offering, which he shall offer to Yahweh, the subject is to be supplied from the verb, contains instructions. One, as to the accompaniment of these sacrifices in verses 12 through 14, and two, as to the eating of the flesh of the sacrifices, that's verses 15 through 21, with the prohibition against eating fat and blood in 22 through 27, and three, as to Yahweh's share of these sacrifices in verses 28 through 36. All right. Those of you who take the time to watch this thing 6 or 7 times will fully get what that just said. But hopefully it'll make sense as we go through it. So we're going to pick up here with 11, of course. Literally, it would say, and this instruction sacrifice the peace, the word peace, as in peace, not more, but it's in plural. So this word is in plural, peace in plural, that he bring to Yahweh, to using God's proper name. So it says, vezot, and this. So this, and this is feminine plural on zot, so it's like saying this is. And this is, that sounds too much like this is. This in plural. I guess you could say these. And these instructions, let's say it that way, because this is Torah in plural. So there's more than one instruction here. There's many instructions, or maybe it's one instruction for many things. At this point, we don't know. But it is going to be the instructions concerning what? Zevach, sacrifices. This is the word for slain or slaying, the actual cutting up of a victim, which would be the lamb, or could be a cow, it could be a pigeon, right, for the cutting up of that, or the splitting up could even be of flour. I knew that was going to get away from me. Just trying to be covered when I need to be. All right, so then we have, let's see, what was our word? Sacrifices. Shalamim. That's the peace, but it's peace in plural. See, I've told you guys this story here recently about this lecture where this Jewish rabbi was giving the lecture. He was asked to give it in English, of course, and so he couldn't remember how do you make something plural in English, and he kept saying boyim, because he was talking about the boys. They were doing this, and the boys were doing that. He kept saying boyim. We're all sitting there going, oh. Anyway, that was very disrespectful, I'm sure, but we were young and good looking back then. All right. So the peace, these are peace offerings. I guess I should really talk about what a peace offering is, because in the pagan world, a peace offering is your God is mad at you and you got to make him unmad at you. So if your God is mad at you and he's, you're going through a drought because your God is angry with you, then maybe you got to take a young girl and toss her over the volcano or some nonsense like that to make him unmad. Wow. I mean, why don't he just do it himself? With one word, he could just get rid of all of us. I don't know. I don't understand that. A peace offering is not about that. It's not about making your God unmad at you. It's about you getting back on the path. And getting back on the path is what brings peace in your life. God's life does not turn upside down because you did something wrong. Right? Anyway. It says Asher Yakriv, that he brought. La. See, there it goes. Now I need it. See what I got? Instead of having to grab the top of my head every time I turn around. La Yahweh. That's to God, and of course using his proper name. So verse 11 says, and this is the instructions of the sacrifice, sacrifices of peace that are brought to Yahweh. Instruction of those words, instruction of. Onkelos by Drauzine and Wagner wrote, the Todah, the Thanksgiving offering, discussed in this section differed from the Shelamim in two ways. More loaves were offered, and they may be consumed only during a single day and night, in contrast to the other Shelamim, which might be eaten over 2 days. Gosh, I've already forgotten about all that. Also, they said, according to the Babylonian Talmud, in Berachot 54b, a Todah, which means thanks or thank you, was offered as thanks to God after a person crossed a desert. Y'all remember this? Or a sea, was released from prison or recovered from a serious illness. Today, many Jews who have experienced these possibly dangerous situations attend the synagogue service are called to read the Torah and recite a special Thanksgiving prayer. Why he brought up Todah, because we didn't at all. This was Shalom. So this is a peace offering. I guess they're just trying to point out the differences here. They're saying that the Thanksgiving offerings differed in 2 ways from this kind of an offering. More loaves were offered in the Thanksgiving offering, and they were consumed during a single day because they weren't allowed to be left overnight, kind of like the Passover thing. How much time do I have?
3 minutes.
Oh, I'm sorry, kids. We're going to have to stop here and pick up with verse 12, I guess, where we are. In the, is that where we are? Yeah. We will pick up with verse 12 next week. Shalom, y'all.